When it comes to arguments and disagreements, there is one principle that once you fully and comprehensively understand, will change your life. And it's quite simple really. How to win any argument. You can't. Now that might not be what you wanted to hear, but hear me out. You can't win an argument because if you lose an argument, well, you lose it. But if you win an argument, you lose it. Now why is that? Well, let's suppose that you dish out all of the facts. You show indisputably that you are correct and that your opponent is wrong. You poke holes in his logic and shoot down his arguments until he doesn't have a leg to stand on. Now, you'll probably feel great. You've outwitted your opponent. You've bested him in the ring of honor. But what about him? You've hurt his pride. You've made him feel inferior. And for that, he will resent your triumph. Now, some of you may still class that as a win, but there's an old saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Every win of an argument is another bridge burnt. In fact, a quote from Benjamin Franklin describes this idea quite succinctly. If you argue and rankle and contradict, you may achieve a victory sometimes, but it will be an empty victory because you will never get your opponent's goodwill. Now ask yourself this, which would you rather have, a hollow victory or your opponent's goodwill? Because unfortunately, you can rarely have both. Now, hopefully I've convinced you that nothing good can come from an argument, either in business or at home. But can you really go the rest of your life without ever having another argument? Potentially. Now, to be clear here, argument and disagreement are two very different things, but they often get confused because a disagreement, if handled incorrectly, can quickly escalate into an argument. Now, disagreements aren't bad. In fact, they're good. They're opportunities to learn. You should be thankful that something that you hadn't thought about is being brought to your attention. You may even be able to correct yourself before making a serious mistake. And I'll be the first to admit, it's hard to be disagreed with. Humans are not logical beings. We're highly emotional creatures, and sometimes that emotion takes over. But fear not, I'm here to help. And if you follow these steps, you may be able to avoid arguments and actually learn something from these disagreements. You may even be able to change your opponent's mind without ever entering into an argument. And obviously that's a win for everyone involved. The first thing you want to do is distrust your first instinctive reaction. When challenged, we often become quite defensive. Even if you think there's a chance that you could be wrong, protecting your pride becomes a priority. You don't want the other person to win. Make sure you're aware of this. This is a case where your first reaction is probably not your best. Control your temper. Remember, you can measure the size of a person by what makes him or her angry. Listen first. Listen. Simple as that. Give your opponent the opportunity to fully explain themselves. Don't interrupt or try and speak over them. Simply listen. You want to keep things as calm as possible and avoid introducing any hostility into the conversation. You should then look for areas of agreement. You should start focusing on the things that you agree on first before looking at the things that you disagree on. After all, the disagreement might only be a small fraction of the overall matter, and by starting with the things that you agree on will help you move into a more productive conversation. You should also be honest. Now, this is a big one. If after listening to your opponent and hearing them out, you suddenly have a change of heart, now is the time to admit so and apologize. This is probably one of the hardest things to do, but it can save you a lot of embarrassment down the line and avoid situations where you get hit with the dreaded, "I told you so." Now, you should always promise to hear the other person out and digest what it is that they're trying to say. You should study your opponent's argument carefully, and you shouldn't do this with the mindset of "I'm wrong, you're right." You should very much consider the possibility that they're right and you're wrong. A great tip is to view your opponent as, well, not an opponent, but as a friend that's trying to help you out and help you see the light. After all, if they've taken the time to disagree with you on a certain subject, it must mean that they're equally invested in the outcome. Now, if you still haven't come to an agreement, it's probably best to postpone and reconvene at a later date, either later on in the day or another day altogether. Now, this will give both parties enough time to think through their arguments, to gather any facts or additional information that can help present their views that may not have been readily available at the time of the initial disagreement. Again, whilst doing your research, you should be asking yourself the questions, what if my opponent is right? Maybe they're partially right. You may find that the alone time is good for you and that you come to a completely different conclusion without the pressures of a looming argument. And that's it. That's how to win any argument. Just don't argue. Now, I look forward to putting this all into practice when I read the comments and you all tell me that I'm wrong. And finally, if you do want to know more secrets to success, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.